Hello, friends. I'm so glad to be talking with you today. I'm going to do a solo, and it's going to be on exploring our courage, but more importantly, what are the barriers to our courage? And I really like getting specific about this because I think all of us want to live with a little bit more courage, but I'm not sure if we have the clarity that we need to see what is blocking our courage. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into this and get a little deeper into what's blocking our courage. So let's jump in. In my book, I talk about this idea that fear blocks our courage. And let me get real specific of what fear has so many faces. So what I'm realizing and the work that I've done with people is that fear has a face of what I call can't magnets. And it's almost like they pull us in a direction that we don't want to go. So, for instance, let's just use eating. We all know proper nutrition and what we want to do, and having the courage to be able to do that. That's a whole nother thing. The fear sometimes of we're not enough, or we don't have what it takes, or we're not sure if it's working, or we don't have the encouragement we need to move forward. These are all different fears that block us from stepping into courageous actions in life. And in my book, I talk about this idea of can't magnets. And can't magnets, there's 7 forces that I've come across that block us from engaging our fear. And sometimes one of them is at play, sometimes several of them is at play, sometimes it's not even in play internally within you, but you're seeing it and experiencing it in the relationships, either personally, professionally, that you're in. And I've seen it in both. So these are the 7 forces, or what I call the can't magnets, that kind of pull us away from courage. And the first one is what I call closed-mindedness. So I want to speak a little bit to this. The antithesis for this, of course, is receptivity, but closed-mindedness says, I'm not willing to explore a new way or new avenue of doing something. And I would rather cling to, there's visuals come in my head, like a drowning rat clinging to a raft. I'd rather cling to this idea of closed-mindedness than actually let go and recognize maybe there's a boat for me out there. Maybe there's land in view. How do I let go of this closed-mindedness that reduces me and limits me from actually exploring other options? I run into this a lot, but that's one of the faces of fear. We're closed-minded because we're afraid, to use the metaphor of the drowning rat, we're afraid that little rat is afraid that there's no other raft or boat or ship or land in view. What if, though, if he let go of that and he realized his feet could touch the bottom? What if he let go of that raft and then swam a little bit and there was a ship waiting for him? What if he let go of that raft and he realized that he could swim to shore? There's so many what ifs that until we explore it, we aren't able to have the courage we need to let go of something that isn't working for us. And so being open-minded is really important. Being receptive and open-minded helps us go after some new solutions that engage our courage. Once we let ourselves step into a courageous action, like letting go of the raft and recognizing, oh my gosh, my feet can touch the bottom, or, oh my word, the waves are going to take me in and I'm going to swim, or I didn't notice this behind me, but there's a boat that was coming by, or there's so many things that could possibly happen that allow us to start letting go and start being more open-minded. So closed-mindedness is a form of fear. Another great example that I see this, I want to help you see it. You can be closed-minded toward others, and you can be closed-minded towards yourself. I was working with a client not too long ago, and his commitment to his false belief that he didn't matter and people weren't listening to him was shocking. And I thought, if you could have that much commitment to the possibility that he did matter and that people are listening to him, he would then start actually moving into more courage to speak out loud, say what he needs to say, and step into the circles and the conversations and the arenas that he needed to be voicing in. But as long as he was committing to this idea that what he said didn't matter and people weren't listening to him, it was this unbelievable commitment to be closed-minded toward himself and his own ability in this world. As we look at externally that closed-mindedness, recognizing that maybe people were listening to him, they just didn't, he was talking too long, or that he was catching them at the wrong time, or he was talking to the wrong person about the idea, or he was not being clear enough and not using enough words. There's a variety of reasons of why we aren't getting received. But his choice to just chalk it up and say, they're not listening to me, was a closed-mindedness now toward others. So that's a really good example of how closed-mindedness toward yourself and what you believe about yourself, am I worth being heard? And closed-mindedness towards others can really prevent us from engaging our courage. The second one is cold-heartedness. I chose to speak about this because I began to witness it and I didn't know what to call it. So I realized cold-heartedness prevents us from engaging our courage. And let me tell you what I mean by that. If we are convinced that someone, and I'm going to use in the professional setting, if we are convinced that someone is not worth investing in, that is actually a cold-heartedness that gives us a excuse to not engage our courage. And it's a cop-out that we do. We're frustrated because a colleague or a peer isn't listening to what it is we're giving feedback on, and they keep doing the same mistake and sending the same email over and over, and you've asked them not to keep sending that email. Well, instead of addressing that issue and saying, wow, I really need to stop and say, why do they keep doing what I asked you not to do? They develop this cold-heartedness. Well, it's a way we hide. And it's actually out of this fear that maybe they really don't care and maybe they're not really worth it, but there's this fear of engaging our courage. So they move into cold-heartedness versus kind of staying in it and saying, I care enough about myself in this situation. I care enough about this other person to speak my truth. And then we go and talk about the real issue, which is, I've noticed you've sent the same email 10 times. And I've already talked to you about this once. So I want to understand why you keep sending it. It becomes then a courageous conversation that we need to have at the level we need to have it at, but we don't bring cold-heartedness into it. There's a way to do it in a way that says, I really am curious, but I want to talk about what I need to talk about. I'm not going to shy away from it, but I'm not going to be cold-hearted about this. I have a really good example about this. Actually just happened last night. My husband has no problem confronting, and there is this gentleman, our neighbor, one of our neighbors, who continuously does not pick up after his dog. And Darren has caught him twice at this, and he caught him again last night, and he goes, I'm going to go talk to him about it. He walked over to the park, talked to him about it. The guy kind of denied it and said, no, I did pick it. I did pick up after my dog. And Darren looks at him and goes, show me the bag. And then the guy just sighed and goes, you caught me. You caught me. Now, Darren had a choice right there. He could have really rubbed his nose in it, kind of given him a hard time. But he said, listen, I care about you, and our neighbors care about you, and we care that you are good. We want you to be a good neighbor, and we want to give you the feedback that this is not a good neighborly thing. We're tired of you not picking up after your dog. Kids are stepping in it. The park is not made for dogs to just relieve themselves and no one pick up after it. We need you to do your part and be a good neighbor to us. And I'm not kidding you. They hugged it out. Darren invited him over to our house. He goes, if you need anything, that's our house over there. You come to us and we want to be a good neighbor to you. Do you see the difference of how that courage? I mean, I was shocked because I really don't like confronting a conflict. And when he ran across the street to engage this neighbor, I literally ran in the house. When he came back and reported it of how he handled it. And I said, and you gave him a hug? And even the guy said, I don't deserve a hug. I'm not a good neighbor. And my husband said, that's okay. Today you can change. We need you to be a good neighbor. And we're all counting on each of us to be a good neighbor. And here's how I want to be a good neighbor. Come drop by and points at our house. And if you need anything, if you need a doggy bag, anything, we will give it to you for free. Just come ask us. So that cold-heartedness was not a barrier to Darren engaging his courage to step into it. And sometimes the cold-heartedness is a false bravado that we use to gear up our courage to finally go talk to them, but it comes out angry, comes out abrasive, comes out harsh, comes out mean. If you can confront someone and feel like you both authentically want to give each other a hug or a high five afterwards, you've done it well. That means you did not allow cold-heartedness to block your courage. Complaining is the third can't magnet. And complaining is a downward spiral. I'm just going to be blunt. And I'm going to say this all my fingers pointing back. Boy, once I start complaining, I can just keep going and going and going. But you know what's really happening? I don't want to engage my courage. And I've got a personal example of this, at least, over 10 years ago. I remember I was complaining about this author and what he was writing about. And then all of a sudden it just came out of my mouth. I'm like, and what gives him the right to write about it? All of a sudden I could feel something felt off. I'm complaining about someone doing something that he's daring to do that I didn't have the courage to do. And I remember I was on a hike with my husband at the time and he called me on it. He's like, well, why don't you do it? Why don't you write your own book? And I realized I would have rather focused on complaining about this other guy's work. And I was hiding behind the complaining versus engaging my courage. And what does Brene Brown say about that? She quotes a poem talking about this idea of the kudos goes to the person who gets into the arena. And I think as I'm aging and I'm listening to how we grow and transform our lives, I want to be that person that says, I'm not going to hide behind complaining, because complaining takes out my courage. I am going to articulate what I maybe don't like or say my truth or give feedback where needed. But complaining begins the downward spiral and it becomes a very convenient place to hide. And I see this too in groups. It's easier to complain about the culture, the dynamic of the group, than actually become a part of making the culture better. And as I work with people, I'm all about helping them get their feelings and emotions out and venting. And I get that. But we have to pivot over into, well, what's your role in it? There's a role for you to play, whether it's in a personal relationship, there's something for you to speak up about. Might be a professional relationship. There's something for you to address or give feedback on. There's a role for each of us to play. And if we're not playing it, and if we don't step into that role, if we don't step into that moment in our life, that is us avoiding our courage. And we can reach for complaining about it, or we can reach for the courage piece. And complaining is just another face of fear. I didn't want to write my own book, so I would rather complain about this other author's book. And then what gave him the right to write about it? Do you see how that was my fear manifesting itself? And fortunately, I have a good life partner who says, yeah, if you don't like it, write one. And I thought, well, he's not wrong. And then I could feel the fear coming up in me. So I realized I need to face my fear and write my own book and talk about what I want to talk about and recognize that it probably will be complained about or criticized as well, right? Because anyone who steps in the arena, anyone who steps into leadership or steps into any kind of upfront or public thing, they've got a target on them all the time. So when we step out and venture out, recognizing it does take courage. now that I have done my own company and my own book, I'm telling you, I'm much more compassionate. I'm much more cheering on for people and encouraging to anyone trying to venture out, because I know what they're facing on a daily basis. I know what it means to write a book. I know those quiet moments where you're facing down your own false beliefs in your head, wondering if you're even the person to be doing this, or if even anyone wants to listen to you. These are things we have to overcome to engage our courage. And complaining about others, or maybe the environment, or maybe what has been done to you, is a way of avoiding engaging your courage. Condemning. Condemning is something too, it's a little similar to complaining, but condemning is a little harsher, where we just say, I am not even going to allow this into my atmosphere or my world, because I don't approve of anything that they are about, or they're saying, or they're doing. Certainly there's a place to draw boundaries for things, especially for toxic people, but you want to save that for very abrasive, toxic behavior, dysfunctional behavior. I think we can reach for condemnation and condemning way too easily. And I'm going to tell you a secret. It's another face of fear. It's so much easier to condemn someone else's beliefs, whether it's about a project, or whether it's about a relationship, or whether it's about a political idea. It's so much easier to condemn them than it is to engage them and have the courage to engage them and talk about what makes us different, and what makes you tick, and what makes you believe the way you believe. And the opposite of that condemning idea is really saying, I want to show value to everyone's perspective. I don't have to agree with it, but I definitely get to show value and respect to it. So condemning is another face of fear. It's easier to put down and condemn an idea, or a person, or a thought, or belief, than it is to engage our courage to talk with them about it. Criticizing. Criticizing is also another can't magnet. We see this happening a lot in our politics. We see that people are criticizing one another's beliefs, and we're polarizing one another and saying, because you believe in this idea, this makes you this type of person. That's not true. It's not true at all. Because someone holds a belief, it doesn't make them a certain type of person. It's just one tiny piece of what makes them who they are. And the beliefs and the values and the responsibilities and the opinions that we all hold are very complex. We can't take one idea and say, well, that makes you a blank. So I think this idea of criticizing can be another face of fear that says, yep, very similar to complaining, condemning, criticizing. But criticizing, it's easier to say, I'm going to be critical of this, this, and this. And I'm not going to recognize any kind of value or any kind of positive connection in this. I had a recent example of this with someone criticizing in a conversation in one of my coaching calls. And I noticed that he really wanted to spend a lot of time criticizing his peers' leadership style. And the more he started criticizing, his peers' leadership style, the more I started hearing the fear come out that this other leader that he was criticizing was taking risks that he did not want to take. They were financial risks, and they were intelligent risks, but they were risks that he didn't want to take. They were personnel risks. Who this other leader was hiring was taking significant risks that were very different than what he was used to taking as a leader. So when I gently just said, do you think this leader that you're talking about is taking risks that you don't like to take? He got really quiet and said, yeah, you're right. And I said, what do you think's behind that? And I remember him saying, I don't think I have the courage to step out like this other leader's doing. And I said, I know, and that's okay. That's okay that you don't have the courage, but I appreciate you being honest about it. Because when you're honest about it, you can look at what you really need to look at. And criticizing another leader is a way we hide. And again, it's another fear blocker to our courage. It's easier to criticize somebody than it is to actually take your own risks and do it yourself. I experienced this personally not too long ago. And again, if you're your own business owner, and I've owned several businesses, people have an opinion on how you run your business. I always found that fascinating. What I have learned as a rule of thumb is I listen to people who have gone before me and have actually done it, and not only are successful, but have done it in a way that I really respect and admire. So as I'm listening to this person, I realize this person was trying to tell me how to change my business model and actually wanted to be a part of my business model and join my team. So I was listening to him. And then finally I said, well, have you run your own business? He's like, no. But I did do this one business once. I said, oh, how was it? Was it successful? And he goes, no, I actually had to close it down. Already I'm listening to this going, yeah, I'm not interested in hearing that kind of criticism if you haven't even been successful or owned your own company. On the other hand, I was listening to someone else and he was giving me some great ideas about my business model. And I said, have you owned your own business? And he began to talk to me about his successful business model. And the more I listened to him, the more I admired and respected him. Do you see then now this was a form of courage where he's stepping into this to talk to me about some great feedback that I could do in order to grow my company. And I loved it. I totally embraced it because I saw the courage that it took for him to give me the feedback. And I also saw the courage that he'd taken in his own life to do it. This other person who was giving me the feedback that hadn't done his own business model or had a success, I saw that as, yeah, I think it's easier to criticize other people, but I think it's another form of fear where we hide behind. I've done this too. I can relate to this. I have to catch myself because sometimes I can really look at other people and say, oh, start criticizing something they're doing. What's the reality? I'm too fearful of doing it myself. And I love having great people in my life who gently remind me of that, saying, well, go write your own book. Go run your own company. Go hire your own people that you want to get this job done. Trust yourself in this. Nah, it's easier to criticize what other people are thinking and doing than it is to actually face down my fear and engage my courage. So you see how criticism is another barrier and blocker to our courage. Cynicism. Cynicism is something I ran into when I first started working and coaching. It really surprised me. I didn't know what it was at first, but I was working with a group of people and I could hear so many false beliefs just running rampant. Like, well, no one's a good communicator and the industry is tanking and we're not going to be successful anymore. And I don't believe that we can pull up, even to the point of, I don't see what your services can even do to support anything that we're about. There's a form of cynicism that really starts breaking down any kind of relationship, much less a group culture. And I didn't know what it was until I started thinking about it. I go, oh, it's a cynical spirit that says, yeah, nothing's going to get better. And I realized, oh my goodness, I particularly have two leaders in mind who operated so much out of the cynicism, and it ended up taking them out because they continuously talked cynically about the culture and the nature till eventually they were no longer willing to be a part of the culture because they didn't see any hope in the culture changing, nor did they have any kind of responsibility to be a part of the culture changing. And cynicism was that barrier that I saw where they were becoming cynical about all the different new solutions and ideas and change. what I like to do is, if the trust level is high enough, I like to talk to people about cynicism, because nobody wants to be cynical. And I remember a leader in particular, I stepped into the conversation and I said, can we talk a little bit about cynicism and really how it's another face? It's another face of fear. It's easier to be cynical about an idea, a situation, or a person, or a belief. It's easier to be cynical about it because to believe can be very vulnerable. So I watched this leader do it, and there's two leaders I had in mind. One was not able to shift and was really committed to the cynicism and ended up resigning. The other one, I watched shift in his thinking, realizing he'd never heard it put that way. And so I watched him shift and realize, yeah, I guess I am kind of cynical by nature. I think I don't believe either in my peers anymore. I don't believe in the organization. I don't believe in the culture. I don't believe that I even have a role that can impact it. And I said, are you willing to change some of these beliefs and let go of the cynicism? And he said, yeah, actually I am. He completely did a 180 and is one of the strongest leaders now in the company. But I went straight to that core of that can't magnet of cynicism. And some people are ready for it and some people aren't. But I like to give people the chance of the truth. And it doesn't mean that I'm the one that's supposed to help them with the truth. Sometimes we're just supposed to plant a seed and it's just something you noodle on. I know that sometimes people have told me something that I was thinking of something the other day, and 15 years later I go, oh, that's what that person meant. I knew I was hearing truth. I just wasn't able to understand it at the time or integrate it until I had some more expertise, some more maturity, maybe some more healing, whatever it is that I needed to get to a point where I could understand and apply the truth. So even as I talk about these can't magnets, I'm very respectful of the fact that sometimes people are ready to hear the magnets that are pulling them away from courage, and sometimes people are not. And it's okay. Because I don't like to criticize. I don't like to criticize where people are at in their journey. But I think how we meet them there and then let them choose and decide leads me to my last can't magnet, and that's the one of control. I've seen this one backfire very badly in organizations and in personal relationships, friendships, marriages. There becomes an issue that's happening in either the company or in the personal relationship. And so one person decides that they have to control it. That never ends well. It never ends well. Because what's happened is control is a false energy. You think you're controlling it, but I'll tell you right now, you're not controlling anything. And you can't control the other person, and you can't control the organization or the culture or whatever it is that's going on. You cannot control that. So I'm going to use myself as an example in this, because I'm a mother and I have 2 adult children now. And so control has been a bit of a running theme for me as I let go of my young children and embrace them adulting and launch them into college and into their lives and help them really individuate from me. That's always the battle sometimes between the parent and the child, is a sense of control. They need to feel like they have control of their life. I need to feel like I still have control as a parent. And then knowing when to let go, because they don't need the same control as they needed when they were 5 that they need maybe at 18. But there is still this conversation that we need to be having around this idea of control. So there's not a power or a battle of the wills. Once it starts moving into that, that's when you know control has really backfired and it's starting to become another face of fear. Okay, so that blocks our courage. And I remember this was starting to happen a little bit with my 15-year-old son at the time. And I'm so grateful for his ability to be honest with me. But I remember I was talking about mother stuff. Take your vitamins, wear your jacket. And he was like, Mom, I need to be able to make some of these decisions on my own. And I need to feel like I have the control of my own life. And I remember listening to him and I said, you're right, son, you're right. There's still some things I need to give input on as a mother, and you're still a minor. But I am going to recognize that perhaps the way I am talking to you is still a little reminiscent of maybe as a 10-year-old. And I want to back off a little bit more. Can you help me understand where you are feeling this control? As we began to unpack that, he really gave me some insight to help him feel like that he could have the control and I could back off the control. And I remember even to the point, he was cleaning his room once. I said, okay, well, let me come in and inspect it. He goes, nope, you do not get to inspect it. You don't get to do anything. I want to clean the whole thing, and then I will invite you in. And I said, that's fair. You've earned it. You've earned it. So I remember as I stepped back and let him start getting the control in his life, and I let go of the control, which is what I'm letting go of fear, really, right? And I'm having the courage. I'm embracing my courage, not my control. I'm embracing my courage to allow not only my son to grow up, but really this sense of letting him have the control in his life. And it begins to be a form of respect versus a form of fear that is stopping the courage from being engaged between the two of us. So in using that example of his room, it was powerful. He's like, okay, Mom, I'm ready to invite you into my room. And it was just so cute. I walked into his room, 15-year-old son who, the stereotype, right? They're notorious for how they keep their room. And I walked in his room and it was spotless because we had kind of talked about this idea of backing off the control and me having that fear that my son's going to leave the house and he's never going to know how to clean his room. The fears that we all have, whether as a mother or as a leader, they crop up at the weirdest places. And I had to face down my fear that says, no, I've trained him well. He's giving me cues that he's picking up on my fear, and he would rather have the space to step into that. And it was the best I'd ever seen. And from that moment on, I did not get involved with his room, but I would say, okay, this is part of being your mother. I'm going to ask you to clean your room. And then you invite me in whenever you'd like me to see it. And then we would negotiate about the times and all this different stuff so that he could feel in control of what he needed. But he was also not letting the control get as a fear factor between us. And I wasn't letting the control get as a fear factor between us, but I was empowering him. It's probably a better word than control. I was empowering him to be able to step into his own life and feel my faith in him and feel the courage be engaged to step up and really clean his room to a whole new level. We do the same thing in our workplaces. I watch leaders who their direct reports are failing. The supervisors are getting nervous and they're getting nervous. And I said, you've got to let them fail. You've got to let them fail. You've got to let them fall. And you've got to help them learn from it. But if you keep interjecting yourself and you keep trying to prevent them from falling and failing, all they're going to feel is the control. And they're going to feel your fear of their failure, which is only going to make them feel fearful. And courage has completely left the building. So do you see how control can be another block to engaging our courage? So those are the 7 can't magnets that I have seen in my own personal life. And certainly there's more, but I wanted to get real specific on those 7, and you can read more about them in your book. I want you to be real aware of how they can be directed towards yourself and toward others. The more you're aware of that, makes me think of the quote from Parker Palmer, who's a great philosopher of our time. And he says, we need spaces within us and between us that welcomes the wisdom of the soul. And I think as you step into that space within that says, how am I either closed-minded or cold-hearted or complaining or condemning or criticizing or cynical or trying to control the situation? How much am I doing that first? That's the space within. Space between it is then in going and taking that conversation to another person saying, okay, I want to talk with you about this area, but I've already done my own personal accountability and reflection on recognizing where I'm doing it. So I have all my fingers pointing back to me as I step in this conversation with you. And that helps us meet the person where we're at and really engage our courage. I think that where it backfires is if we don't do that space within and really stop and say, where am I fighting this? We lose our credibility. It doesn't really give us the right to step into the conversation with someone else to address it when we're not even willing to address it in ourselves. So I always say to leaders, start with yourself first. And if you're going to confront someone about any of these 7 can't magnets, stop and see if you're doing it yourself. Maybe you're modeling it unconsciously. Maybe you're not aware of the fact you're doing this. Maybe you haven't actually gotten feedback on it. You need to start asking for feedback. I don't know. But I think where you start with yourself first before you step into it with others, it will help you get more clarity on this and confidently step into it so you can engage your courage in a whole new way, and allows you to speak to a topic because you've done your own personal work. I want to speak really clearly to why these can't magnets are so important, because I want to talk to you about what it replaces. When we choose cynicism, and I'm using that word very clearly, this idea of choosing. When we choose cynicism, it actually replaces hope. Which would you rather have? A life of cynicism or a life of hope? So who we are becoming is also what we offer our relationships, our personal relationships, our work relationships. And as a leader, I want to offer hope. As a parent, wife, mother, friend, I want to offer hope. So if I'm living in cynicism, I'll tell you that's all I can offer is cynicism. That's a really sobering thought for me. And this is where I call every leader out to say, you have to understand, if you are thinking cynical thoughts and ideas, this is what you're going to offer your team. This is what you're going to offer your peers. Cynicism does not lead to courage. In fact, it blocks courage. It shuts courage down on your team. Worse, it's the enemy to hope. Control replaces freedom. If we're too busy controlling, whether in the home or whether in the workplace, we're not allowing the freedom of thought, the freedom of will. We're not meeting people where they're at. We're just trying to control to get them to where we think they should go or how they should think. And the reality is, I said this earlier, you can't ever control anybody. But it's weird how we all play that game, isn't it? We've all done it, myself included. Especially as a parent, I've had to really watch that. It's easy because out of our love and care, and let me be clear, a lot of times it's out of this love and deep care for a relationship that we move into control. It's still fear-based. I'm watching some of these parents move into so much control and trying to watch where their kid is at every time. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy. Don't get me wrong. I love being able to pull up my phone and see where my kids are at. And we have that agreement that we can have fun of seeing where each other's at. But if we're doing it out of a control and a fear of trying to control them, and then I've seen parents call them and said, what are you doing over here at Walmart? What are you doing over here at the school? Why are you there? We're moving into that spirit of control instead of freedom, saying, I just saw that he's over at Walmart. That's interesting. I'll ask about it later, or I'll just stay curious in it. And we move into more of a freedom and a freedom of will. All of our relationships in our life will pick up on the fact of whether you value freedom or whether you value control. And I don't know about you, but I do not enjoy being around controlling people. Their fear dominates conversations, relationships, actions, movement. Freedom, well, is so free. It's so joy-filled. So freedom is what I enjoy being around. Again, if we are being controlling, we can't offer freedom and control. So again, I want to keep going back to this is a choice. Making this conscious choice that you want to offer freedom helps you not keep choosing to offer control. As I looked at my son, I realized I want my son to feel freedom in our relationship. And I want him to feel my respect and my trust in him. I want that versus the control. So I want to give up some of my control. I have the right to hold the control as a parent, but I don't want to exert that right. I want to choose freedom between us. And as he's asking me for more freedom, I want to be able to respect that and say, yes, I want to give you more freedom. So you see then how what we choose to offer can be cultivated in the relationship. If you want to be in a controlling relationship, offer control. If you want to be in a freedom relationship, offer freedom. Another example comes to mind with this, where I've got lots of great friends, and I learned to do this as I got older, and I just realized I'm not that friend that calls you every single day and remembers all your birthday and all your great events and anniversaries. I'm just not that friend. But I will tell you this, you may call me at any point and we'll pick up wherever we left off. And it might be years ago. It might be last month. It might be last week. But I don't hold this need to control the cadence of which we communicate. I'm very free about that. And actually, I enjoy that kind of freedom in a relationship. Once I got in touch with that, I had a lot more freeing relationships versus controlling relationships where I was trying to be something I'm not. I was trying to make sure I wasn't disappointing. That's a form of a controlling relationship. The closed-mindedness, you know what that replaces? It replaces trust. If you want to cultivate trust in a relationship, you want to stay open-minded. The moment you start moving into closed-mindedness, it starts breaking down trust. People stop sharing with you because they'll feel the closed-mindedness. The cold-heartedness replaces compassion, empathy. Cold-heartedness makes people feel like devalued in your presence. It makes you feel like we're not worth it. So when I call out compassion and empathy, it's reminding people to step into this belief, which I hold, is every single person has value. I truly believe that people hold the imago Dei within them. The imago Dei is a Latin term for the image of God. So if I believe every human being holds the image of God in them, the imago Dei, I'm going to treat them very differently. Doesn't mean I always do it well. Let me be clear on that. But it's one of the standards that I hold. So I make sure that I'm really paying attention to offering this idea of compassion and empathy because I hold value first. That replaces all cold-heartedness. Complaining replaces belief. The more we complain, the less belief that people can hold in our presence. Again, I'm going to say, what do you want to be known for? Do you want to be known for someone who offers belief? I know I do. Then be aware of the complaining. And that can be hard because I'm a critical analysis. I've been trained that as a researcher. So sometimes I can really look at things and have ideas and opinions on them. But I want people to feel that belief is growing in our relationship and in our conversation. And complaining starts becoming this excuse or this barrier to grow that belief. Condemning replaces grace. Grace is really this idea, the Webster Dictionary describes it as the quality or state of being considerate or thoughtful, to do honor or credit to someone or something by one's present. And then courteous goodwill or willingness to be fair and honest. That's the Webster Dictionary definition of grace. When we are focused on condemning, we can't offer grace simultaneously. So understanding that when we slip into this condemning thought pattern, we're not able to offer grace. And again, that scares me. I want to be someone who grows this idea of considerate goodwill. And I want to grow grace in all my relationships. And I want it to be shown toward me. Condemning breeds condemning. Grace can breed grace. And then lastly, this idea of criticizing, it replaces kindness. Again, we cannot hold criticism and kindness at the same time. We have to be able to choose. Our brain and our heart cannot hold them both. We can't be so busy criticizing and then show kindness. And I will say, again, this is all my fingers pointing back. When I get stuck in any kind of cynicism, control, closed-mindedness, cold-heartedness, complaining, condemning, and criticizing, reaching for the opposite helps me. So for instance, if I'm busy criticizing, I heard myself doing it today. I was criticizing someone that was involved in a workshop that I'd hired him to do, and I just wasn't super impressed. And I could feel myself criticizing, and then I could feel myself saying, and he's new and he's young. And this is one of his first ones. I was moving into kindness because I could feel myself getting really worked up. It's amazing how good we can get at criticism, right? And I just thought, oh, I don't want to hone the craft of criticism. Again, I'm a critical thinker. I've been trained that way to analyze, and I can really analyze something from every corner. It's my greatest strength, but it can be my greatest weakness and working. It's the shadow side of my strength. If I'm using my criticism to keep tearing down someone, kindness helps me pull up. And so I could even feel myself kind of criticizing this individual. And then I realized, you know what? I want to offer kindness. I want to offer kindness. And I want to step into that kindness because I want to remember that all of us have to start somewhere and all of us are working hard. And I still have choices to make on whether I want to partner or be involved in with any of these people, but I can still offer kindness. I can still offer the kindness in there. And that is a higher form of courage. So as we look at hope replacing cynicism, freedom replacing control, trust replacing closed-mindedness, compassion replacing cold-heartedness, belief replacing complaining, and grace replacing condemning, and kindness replacing criticizing, do you see how it requires more courage? It requires more courage to live in hope and freedom and trust and compassion and belief and grace and kindness than it does to live in cynicism, control, closed-mindedness, cold-heartedness, complaining, condemning, and criticizing. So to engage our courage, think about what counteracts some of these can't magnets, these negative C's, and use that awareness to pull the other way. Pull hope when you're feeling cynical. Pull freedom when you're feeling control. Pull out trust when you're feeling closed-mindedness. Pull out compassion when you're feeling close-hearted. Pull out belief when you're feeling like you're really spiraling down into complaining. Pull out grace when you're condemning, and pull out kindness when you're criticizing. In doing that, we actually cultivate a space that grows our courage to say what it needs to be said, to step into our beliefs and our truths, to have the conversations at the level we need to have them at, that honors the dignity of the human being in front of us, and it honors our own personal dignity. And it allows us to be on this journey that says, of course, we all have these can't magnets. The reason I call them can't magnets, and I use the metaphor magnets, is because we don't drift into hope and freedom and trust and compassion and belief and grace and kindness. We don't drift into that, do we? We drift into these can't magnets. It takes intentionality, and frankly, it takes real courage. And courage is connected to vulnerability. So it takes this vulnerable courage to grow the hope, to grow the freedom, to grow the trust, to grow the compassion, to grow the beliefs, to grow the grace, and to grow the kindness. That's where I want to leave you all as I think about this. And I welcome any thoughts, any responses. Shoot me an email, shoot me a text. Tell me what you're thinking about some of this, or any ideas about the can't magnets and how they're pulling the opposite direction, and what you're doing to pull, to be intentional, to pull away from these can't magnets, and making sure that you are aware that we're not drifting into these can't magnets that block our fear. All right. So there's more coming for courage, but I'm going to leave you with this. And I want to just say I'm cheering you on. And I see you working so hard. Oh my goodness, do I ever. I have so many heroes in my life since I've started coaching, because I know behind the scenes what some of you have to do in order to live intentionally and do life differently. And I believe it's the most courageous way to live, to embrace that vulnerability. And it inspires me to keep growing and keep moving and keep going in the direction that I want to go, so that I don't drift into a life that I'm not made for. I want every one of us to live a life we're made for. And it does require a courage. More importantly, it requires addressing what's blocking our courage. Cheering you all on. Thanks for joining us today. We'd love a review. Helps us out quite a bit. Wherever you are, just drop a review, and you can find out more at heatherpenny.com. Cheering you on.